absolutely do not have a sense of calling to be ordained, but that doesn't mean my calling is any way less of a commitment or less vital to the building of the church and the kingdom.
Our objective for the common good is to contribute to transforming our society and communities more closely to reflect the kingdom of God. And our work includes supporting bishops in the House of Lords, taking forward campaigns in the public square following debates here, a notable example of which would have been the campaign to reduce the amount that could be spent on fixed odd betting terminals, and also supporting initiatives that address violence and injustice. In 2017, the Prime Minister and Archbishop Justin gave their backing to the Clewer initiative, which was set up to combat slavery in this country. As a consequence of this important work, 38 out of 42 dioceses have trained churchgoers to spot signs of day-to-day slavery in the society around them. This 3-year programme has already gained traction with the launch of a campaign to stop car wash slavery, and you may have already received the postcard that describes that in a bit more detail. This short film gives you a glimpse of the scale of the problem that we're trying to address.
My life was torture. The beatings, the threat of my kids' lives had me in submission because I didn't want anything to happen to my children.
I am really proud of how I treat all the girls who work for me. They're not so much staff, more like family. I could not believe my luck when Min decided to move here. Look, like most teenagers, she can be a bit moody, but that soon sorted out after I had a nice chat with her.
Nikolai is a great worker. He's worth his weight in gold. When he first came over here, he had nowhere to stay. So I sorted him out with a really nice flat he shares with a couple of the other boys. Sometimes he talks about moving on to something else. So I just sit him down and tell him that if he wants to do that, I will be here to help.
40 million people around the world live in slavery. That's more than at the height of the transatlantic slave trade 2 centuries ago. It's thought that tens of thousands of them are here in the UK. They paint your nails, they wash your car, they pick your strawberries. Some are even forced to sell their bodies for sex. Men, women and children of all nationalities become enslaved. All it takes is the hope of a better life, a dream that is then pounced on by heartless criminals and turned into a nightmare.
Turning to education, an area, a particular passion of mine, I need to keep reminding myself that 1 million students attend 4,700 Church of England schools every year. So at national level, one of the priority areas has been to focus on strengthening school leadership, a whole area of leadership development, of new and upcoming leaders, of multi-academy trust CEOs. Last February, the Church of England launched the Foundation for Educational Leadership to address a couple of priorities identified in the report, Deeply Christian, Serving the Common Good. The Foundation aims to develop inspirational leaders. And the first phase of the Foundation is over a 3-year period and is intended to build networks nationwide to bring school leaders together. In 2017, 6 conferences were attended by 670 educational leaders. They will also provide challenging development programmes and encourage education leaders to understand the Church of England's vision for education. Finally, it's also exciting for us to report that the government has made commitment to 31 new Church of England free schools, with dioceses now ready to bid for a further 38 in the next wave of applications.
The impact of digital innovation was keenly felt in all of our 2017 work, as we've already started to see, but none more so than in the work that we do to help dioceses and cathedrals in their mission. I hope that you've all had the opportunity to explore the new Church of England website, the various online toolkits, the new apps, and also the digital links that you'll see in the annual report and accounts this year. A Church Near You, the website that helps people to identify their closest church, was relaunched in November 2017, and this slide is a reflection of that. It has been an incredible success. The site receives 13 million page views in a year. And in the run-up to Christmas, 1.5 million people used it to find their local church services. Encouragingly, 81% of users are using it for the very first time, suggesting that it's a hugely valuable tool for evangelism.
And more generally, the annual report details a very wide range of initiatives that the National Church is focused on. Tools, resources, initiatives, all helped and designed to equip and serve dioceses and cathedrals to be as effective as possible in their own mission and ministry. I just wanted to spotlight cathedrals in particular. We all know our cathedrals play a central and vital role. Yet some have struggled with financial issues and challenges around governance. And because of this, a working group was set up last November by the Archbishops of Canterbury and York. The working group was asked to review the cathedral's measure of 1999, particularly considering financial management, major building projects, safeguarding, accountability, oversight and scrutiny. The group includes representatives from business, local government and the heritage sector, as well as churchgoers, cathedral worshippers, deans and bishops. Tomorrow afternoon, you will have an opportunity to engage and debate the report of the Cathedral's Working Group. Safeguarding. I'm not going to spend much time on this because we spent a significant amount of time on this on Saturday morning. But just to highlight again, the Council continued its work in 2017 to promote a safer church, principally through training, through policy and guidance, through independent diocesan audits and engagement with the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Major areas of work included efforts to improve the consistency and the quality of safeguarding arrangements across the whole church.
And one mark of the success of our safeguarding work will when we can truly say that the Church of England is a welcoming place and a safe place for all people. At one stage, when we were reflecting on our objectives, we wondered whether we needed the last objective, to be a church for all people. And that's because that vision essentially permeates everything that we do. However, it was in recognition of the fact that we do need to make progress much further and faster to include all our brothers and sisters in every part of the church, that it was made a specific objective. Positive steps last year include strengthening our ties with charities committed to working with issues of disability, and the preparatory work for this year's conference on the role of disabled people in church life. Another item was the relaunch of the National Estate Churches Network and a conference on estates evangelism with representatives from the Church Army, the Church Urban Fund, Ecumenical partners, and many theological institutions. We are trying increasingly in this area of work to reach out to as many people who share the things that we are trying to do. And finally, also, work supporting the College of Bishops with their annual meeting when 25 BAME clergy were invited to discuss a really wide range of items on the agenda. And we've seen the renewed commitment from the House of Bishops to the inclusion and representation of BAME clergy at all levels in the leadership of the Church.
So just to close, Mary and I wanted to just share a few more sort of personal reflections before we turn to a space for some questions. I've only been involved in, well, anything at the national church level for the last 2.5 years or so. And I guess I just want to share two thoughts with you. The first is the reality that my experience of the Council over the last 2.5 years is that it is relentlessly focused on serving the front line, serving frontline parishes, serving frontline deaneries and dioceses. It is actually, I was kind of half wary that it was going to be an ivory tower. It is simply not like that. We come as members of parishes, deaneries and dioceses to the Council. And there is a relentless desire to figure out how can we serve, equip, support and encourage what is going on at the grassroots, at the front line. So that's the first thing I wanted to underscore, personal reflection. The second is I've been really encouraged to see the way the Council is wrestling more and more with that question of growth, but not just quantity of growth. Again, I think I was fearful that there would be a very narrow focus on just numbers. Far from it. There is a growing effort to really grapple with a growth, with the quality of growth, a growth in terms of discipleship, a growth in every region, and a growth in every generation.
And although I've been around a little longer, I share some of the things that Matthew comments on. In particular, for me, I've been conscious of a much clearer focus on mission, that we test ideas increasingly against whether or not they serve the objectives for growth, for renewal, for spiritual deepening and for better discipleship. And also, you will tell me whether we've been successful in this, but I feel that there is a much greater focus on deepening our relationships with dioceses and cathedrals to serve where we can your mission, your strategies in your areas. And I think we can beat ourselves up a lot, and it's true that there is an enormous amount to do. But there has been genuine progress in tangible ways in a number of areas. That doesn't mean to say the job is done. In fact, I was heard to comment in a very curmudgeonly audit committee chair way at a discussion of risk, in particular the risk about whether or not we will have enough vocations to enable our ministry to grow. And my comment was, yes, all very good, but one swallow doesn't make a summer. And then later I caught myself and I said, well, it's true, one swallow doesn't make a summer, but it is a beautiful, encouraging sign of summer and better times to come. So let's take that and be thankful that through God's grace we have our swallow, and look at what we can do in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Matthew, for that informative and encouraging presentation. We do now have time for questions. And can I make the normal plea that is made from this place, which is, please, can you ask questions, not make a speech? Patrick? And the gentleman there.
Richmond, Norwich 180. Thank you for the show and thank you for all the information. My question is about explicit commitment to supporting families in passing on the faith. I was delighted to see that the objectives for this year do mention youth explicitly. I was sorry they didn't last year because the research shows the importance of concentration on that early stage of life for coming to faith. The research also shows the importance of families and reveals that less than a third of Anglican families see it as their own responsibility.
And your question, please, Patrick.
Is there going to be an explicit commitment to supporting families in coming to faith?
And I'll take one. I'll be doing them in groups of 3, so I'll be encouraged to see someone standing. Alison.
Bill Bravener, Durham 104. Thank you, Chair, for asking me. I welcome very much the commitment to having a church for all people and making that one of the 9 priorities. Given that over a third of the population of this country has a disability or a long-term health condition, I wonder what progress can be made and what priority can be given to, in our evangelism strategy, seeing those numbers reflected amongst the body of the church, and also making progress to seeing those sorts of numbers reflected in the leadership of the church.
Alison.
Alison Coulter, Winchester 425. I speak as a new member of Synod. How are we doing simplifying legislation, do you feel? Are there any swallows in sight?
And now call upon responses to those 3 questions, please.
So I think the question on families and supporting families, the answer is very simply yes. There is a great deal going on that at the moment. It's a core part of discipleship, it's a core part of our work with schools, but there's particularly some work underway to look at the 3 areas of family, schools, and how these work together, and that's being developed with the House of Bishops, so I think you can expect next year in the annual report to be something pretty explicit on this.
On the question of a church for all people, and it was specifically focused around people with disabilities, I think on this objective as a whole, the Council recognises entirely that last year was very much a year of exploring what could be done. I spoke earlier about the fact that preparation work was done for a conference to look at issues to do with disability. We try in the building of the council to be as inclusive as we can. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying that probably at least 2 members of the council, to my knowledge, have some disability, although you wouldn't notice it from the way they work and participate. We are conscious, as we seek to replace members of the council who are leaving us, or either have left us or are about to leave us, to think about our ethnic mix. We have lost 1 member from a BAME background this year because she has moved on to do other things. And so that's very much in our minds as we think about how we rebuild the council for the future. So there are 2 strands of work. One is about doing it ourselves in the council, and the other is working with others to see how more effective we can be. On simplification, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that we have now formed the Legislative Reform Committee. I believe it's meeting for the first time this week, and that if anybody has any ideas that they want to put forward, I'm sure that Simon Butler, who is the chair of that committee, would be delighted to hear from you.
David, gentleman at the back, Bishop Rachel.
David Lamming, 399 St Edmunds in Ipswich. On page 54 of the report, we see the various heads of expenditure, which includes 1.61 million on safeguarding. And on page 22, we read that the Council has continued to engage with ICSA, supplying a range of information witness statements as part of the investigation into the Anglican Church in England and Wales. I wonder if you could give Synod some information about the scale of what's been involved with the Archbishop's Council involvement in ICSA. It's a core participant in that inquiry, and I understand that there's been a large amount of documentation supplied, presumably also a large amount of time, and how much of that 1.6 million is devoted to ICSA?
Simon Taylor Darby, 103. Thank you very much for the report. Thank you also for the good news of increase in vocations. The question I have relates to the number of women in training for ordained ministry, because you gave us a lovely positive figure, but the danger is that it hides quite a lot. Could you please tell us whether there has been an increase in women being accepted for training for stipendiary and for incumbent status ministry? Thank you.
Bishop of Gloucester.
Rachel Treweek, Gloucester, number 19. Thank you for that presentation. Thank you particularly for the visual presentation. My question is, if we are being a church for all people, how can we hold one another account to ensure that all our visual representations, our reports, our films, have a much higher percentage of people who are not white in them? I think we need to be clear on what our messages are being given visually. I'd like to know how we can do that and hold each other account. Thank you.
So first question regarding the scale of the involvement in ICSA. The first thing to say is thousands of pages have been written, shared, reviewed by Church House staff. We've seen many of those at the Council itself. There's 2 dedicated members of staff on the Church House team, and many other members of the Church House team have spent a very significant amount of time specifically on this. Regarding the question around younger women in the context of stipendiary training, the answer is yes, there has been an increase, but if you want more specific numbers, could you please connect up with Julian later on after the session or during the break?
Rachel, I couldn't agree with you more. I haven't actually done the number count of visuals in the annual report, but it was one of the things that we sought to do, was to ensure that we did have representative visuals. I would also say, I don't know whether some of you may have been to the event, but the New Estates Evangelism Task Group video was launched last night. Work with the BAME community forms a large part of that work, and there were many, many appropriate visuals in it. And I think I said earlier, we have to keep it in mind the whole time, so I'm really grateful for your prompt and your encouragement for us to stick to it.
We have time for more questions. Let's move over there. That's the lady there standing on the stairs, and the lady next to her, and the gentleman there, please.
Sarah Schofield, Sarah Schofield, 147, Lichfield. I need to preface this question with an apology to my fellow Archbishop's Council members. There's been a lot of we about the imagery, and we didn't all see the film before. And as one of the disabled people on Archbishop's Council, I might have had, these are the questions I would have said in private. However, I'd like to know whether we consulted with deaf Anglicans as to whether subtitles might have been helpful. I don't understand the balance between signing and subtitles as to what's appropriate, but I was very conscious that some of you were trying to watch the screen and watch the signs. And when we thought about the choice of images, did we try a focus group with the people whose images might not have been there? And again, apologies, I would have said this to you privately. We have been talking about communication. We're on the road, and I apologise. I'm not part of the we on that tiny bit. I am immensely proud of the Archbishop's Council. I'm part of the we on the 99.9% of it, but please, can we get better on that £400,000 a year, which is on Objective 9. Thank you.
Lucy Doherty, Portsmouth 385. Thank you for that report and the encouraging news. And it's fantastic to see the work that's been done. This is the report, the national report, if you like, the report that the nation sees about our work. I struggle to find any reference to our work with our fellow Christian churches and other denominations in England and further afield. Other, of course, than mention of the Anglican Communion. But I just wondered if you could say a little bit about your commitment to working with our ecumenical brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting and enlightening report. I think the three key benefits was it set out clearly where we are going, how we're going to get there, and also how we're going to pay for it. Two very succinct questions. On the bottom of page 18, what extra challenges are there for you of administering and indeed bidding for running free schools? And on page 19, when it speaks about the crossing the threshold resources, which again I enthusiastically welcome, do we know how many people thus far have made use of them? Thank you.
I invite response.
With permission, I'm going to take the first and the third of those, and Matthew will follow up. Sarah, can't see where you are now. Up there. Thank you for calling us out. I think it's important that because we work together, that we should be able to share honestly if we feel that there's something to be shared. It is true that we didn't consult on the content of the presentation. There has been discussion, though, with the signers, and we recognise that it is difficult to convey something which is both words and visuals, and particularly, I know, on the Cluer Initiative film, where we did think about it quite carefully, because there, the double difficulty is that the words that one is hearing are not the words on the screen. But we felt that it is such a powerful video that Synod would welcome seeing it. So I think there are lessons to be learned. We will do it better next time, I think. On the question of to what extent, there were two questions. One was about free schools, and there is work going on at the moment to examine the funding at various levels within the Church. This is not money that comes through the Archbishop's Council. Much of the work of the Church of England on education, the responsibility for it lies with the National Society. There is a joint team at staff level, and the strategic thinking is developed between the Archbishop's Council and the National Society. And the whole question of funding of new schools is one that's under consideration at the moment. The second part of your question was about the extent to which we know how many people use the various resources. And measurement is something that is increasingly on our mind, evaluating the impact of the work we do. It would be foolish to pretend that I have all the detailed information of the measures that we do have, but I'm sure that we could provide those to you in writing subsequently. But there are also things that we are not yet measuring very well. And the whole raft of work, some of which was set out in the report from the Strategic Investment Board to talk about how we are evaluating the projects that benefit from grant funding, thinking about what we mean by church growth and how we measure that, reflecting on our measures so that we capture properly the impact of new worshipping communities, and thinking too simply about if we've invested in the development of resources for the church, we need to be sure that we invested that money in the right place so that we can learn for the future. So yes, we are measuring, and certainly very happy to provide you with further information subsequently.
So finally, the question on working with fellow churches, fellow Christian churches. So I think the first thing, this hasn't been drawn out a particular objective. I think the aspiration has been to integrate that, so ecumenism, in all of the objectives. We are members of the Council for Christian Unity. There are a lot of ecumenical activities going on in many individual areas. I think, though, it's pretty clear that I think it would be a really good thing to think about the next annual report, to try and draw this out much more explicitly. So I'm very grateful for the suggestion. So next year we will try and draw this out more explicitly, how we're working with fellow Christian churches. So thanks for the suggestion.
I've been working very hard here. We've been working together to try and make sure that voices are heard from all, over the whole range of experience, lay clergy, etc. We are very much not hearing, with one exception, voices from the Northern Province. I have time for one more question. If there is anybody standing from the Northern Province, I would be delighted to take it, and please make it a brief one. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much for calling me Elizabeth Paver, Sheffield 407. May I thank Mary and Matthew for this presentation, which I think has been very informative and comprehensive of our work. I am a member of the Archbishop's Council, but one thing I would ask you, would you agree with me that something that the Synod really could hear loud and clear today is what we can do about this dreadful situation of modern-day slavery? The Clure initiative, you may have gone to a presentation in your diocese. I was delighted to hear that 38 out of 40 dioceses had had these, and I have been present in one of these.
Liz, I'm running against time, on time business. It is really important, but can you just ask the question?
Could you ask the... do you agree with me that every member of Synod should take this home with them and act upon it? Thank you.
Yes. Please, it's enormously important.
Thank you so much, everyone, Mary and Matthew, and for all the questions you've asked. And that now concludes this item of business.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. We now come to the Archbishop's Council's budget and proposals for apportionment for 2019. This covers items 15 to 22 on the agenda. For these items, members will need GS 2097. Thank you. I'd like to say at this point that when we come to debate items 15 to 22, as on previous occasions, I intend to call John Spence to respond after every third speech, should he wish to do so. So I call upon Canon Dr. John Spence to speak to and move item 15, that this synod do take note of this report. You have up to 15 minutes, as I gather that you will be moving the individual budget items formally without a speech. Thank you.
John Spence, Archbishop's Council 467, and may I say how excited I am to have this prime mid-morning slot. In the first 2 years of my incumbency in this role, I had to compete first with a late-running tennis Wimbledon final, and the following year with the World Cup. So here we are in good daytime viewing territory, and like any good daytime viewing, there will be the mixture of high points and lows, maybe a bit of drama, a powerful but maybe a cliffhanger ending, but I'm afraid there'll be no raunchy bits. Archbishop, if that was you, I'll do something later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place the budget in the context. I'm going to be talking here about the 2019 budget, but very much in the context of 2020 to 22 and the 20s as a whole, because that is where most of my energies are now lying. And let's look at the context for this budget. For at least the last 50 years, the attendance in the Church of England, as measured by average weekly attendance, has declined. That measure, I know, overstates the rate of decline. It's a number that we need to move slightly away from, but the direction is clear. Since 1979, our age profile, which at that time matched the population as a whole, is now one where we average 12 years older than the population. And there's that lovely statistic of the 8. An 81-year-old is 8 times more likely to go to church than an 18-year-old. And that's having its impact on finance. The numbers of people in our planned giving schemes have declined by 13% since 2010. Their commitment has grown. Their individual commitments have grown by 27%, or roughly 4% a year, enabling the overall sum to rise by 10%. But in 2016, for the first time, the total coming out of planned giving declined. While overall parish incomes rose by 1.8%, there was a 0.4% decline in the total of planned giving. And when we look at parish share, we see those strains coming through again. Parish share growth, but under whichever scheme operates in your diocese, has struggled to get up to 2%. In the last 2 years, you'll see 1.4% and then 0.9% increases. And the very worrying news is that year to date till May, we are seeing a 0.4% decline in parish share giving. That, I may say, does come at the same time that we have seen a considerable increase of 130 million in the aggregation of parish reserves, which says something about the degree to which some parishes are harbouring their assets while others are struggling with income. You could argue we're on a burning platform. But I want to talk to you this morning about a different sort of fire. The renewal and reform agenda is about our hearts going out, we walking hand in hand, burning with the joy of the risen Christ, fired by the Holy Spirit, with such a magnetism that draws more people in to join us because of the transparent joy of our faith. Renewal and reform is not about money, it's about souls. Our narrative based on St. Luke chapter 9, the harvest is plentiful. But it does, of course, have financial implications. Firstly, to reap the harvest, you need to invest, and we are in that investment phase now. You've heard from Mary and Matthew. I shall enlarge on that slightly in a moment. And second, the harvest which we seek are souls and bodies coming to the joy of Christ. But we all know it isn't enough to measure success in numbers of pilgrims. It is in the depth of their witness, in their living discipleship, just one evidence of which will be their financial commitment to Christ. So let's look through those investments again, and we see the success that renewal and reform is achieving already. The number of new ordinands up 14.9% last year, over 22% across 2 years. A stunning number. The digital programme, regularly reaching 1.5 million people with their different campaigns. And Patrick, Richmond and Norwich, yes, if you look at their Alexa piece, there are elements in there encouraging children to be taught how to pray at home. Setting God people free, an area of growth that has far more to do yet, as we have the learning communities and the development of resource. And of course the Strategic Development Fund, which the number you were given, 44 million since start of 17. To last month's Strategic Investment Board, we allocated a further £27 million across 10 dioceses, 7 from the Northern Province. And what we're seeing is both an increasing number, but also an increasing ambition of strategic funding bids coming forward. Carrying on, we have the peer review process in place, which enables mutual learning. The simplification agenda, Alison, your question earlier, phase 1 completed. Phase 2 nearly completed, taking a lot of process out of this chamber to enable us to focus on issues of real substance. The Working Together strand, which has seen 13 dioceses already come onto the work stream, onto the application around recruitment to save you cost and increase quality. But equally, I would say, much more to be done if we are going to develop the right sort of HR systems and people systems which will enable dioceses and parishes to reap efficiencies in the future and which will ensure that our safeguarding is of the highest order. And then all the work around strategic leadership and development programmes, which has so far seen 73 diocesan suffragan bishops taking part in modules, over 40 deans doing the mini-MBA, and of course that's only a start, because what we are all talking about, Martin Seeley and the Ministry Council, looking at how we can really create this learning piece as a lifetime activity for ordained and lay leaders alike. So there, the investments, but of course, as yet, not the harvest. And what dioceses are saying to us is, firstly, that they have found it quite tough, actually, to move away from Darlow since Darlow ceased at the end of 2016. The transition's been considerable. For all the reasons I've just stated, that income is very constrained and that we need to keep the tax, the apportionment we levy on dioceses down to manageable numbers as much as we can. They remain committed to growth. This is what's at the heart of renewal and reform. It is the response to every diocese saying, we wish to grow, we need the strategies to do it. Please help us work out how to develop those strategies and deal with the resource. We have got historic assets, but we are nervous about using them in some cases, lest it constrains us further for tomorrow. And what we need is confidence. Confidence in the longer-term funding position. It's not enough to know where we are for 19. Help us understand that the funds will be there across 20 to 22 and beyond, so that we can invest with confidence. So what are the tasks of the Archbishop's Council as we look towards the next decade? Firstly, it is indeed to imbue that confidence. I am brimming with confidence. I am absolutely overflowing with confidence that we are going to achieve a satisfactory whole church funding solution for the next decade. And I'll come back to the evidence for that later. Secondly, we need to aggregate all the potential demands for investment that lie ahead. Yes, there is the work around ordinands and curacies. There is the work around lower income communities. We want to invest more in digital, quite clearly. We're building so far. Just across this weekend, you've identified that we will probably need to spend more on safeguarding if we're going to get this really right. And yesterday, there were thoughts about how we might spend more in areas to avoid damage to our environment. We will aggregate all of those, and then we will, by consensus, look to prioritise all the different areas where we could be spending money. And I say to my colleagues in the House of Bishops, we will need you, gentlemen and ladies, please, to work closely together to give us clear consensual guidance on what your key priorities are. And from that, we will develop a whole church equitable solution. And I use the word equitable because if there is going to be some pain, if there is going to be the need to draw on some of our historic assets, in order to fund the investment which will enable the growth of tomorrow, that does have to be on an equitable basis and cannot be done by asking one body of this organisation to draw heavily on its funds when others are not drawing on theirs. And then finally, what's very much clearly coming through, as we see that the ways in which people give and ways and honour their financial commitments are changing, where planned giving is not the way that younger generations operate, we will need to think about how we foster greater spirits of enterprise, ever looking for efficiency, constantly exploring innovation. Church House, serving the diocese, the parishes, the deaneries alike, needs to move into a different phase and a different pace of innovation, shedding practices which were okay in the past, adopting those that we need for the future. So what are the features of the 2019 budget? Well, firstly, we're accommodating the 13.7 cost associated with the increased number of ordinands. That's in vote 1. In vote 2, we're accommodating the increased spending predominantly driven on the safeguarding agenda, but also the renewal and reform programme. We have set the executive team challenges around efficiency, which will require them to find savings, and there's a gap in the budget which they've got to close, and they have already given me proposals on how they will do that. We will draw ever more on the funding from our partners, and I'm coming into that into a second. And then, of course, we will need to keep going by this year alone, drawing at an unsustainable level of our reserves of £2 million. It is the right thing to do as a bridging solution, pending that whole church equitable solution, which I look forward to presenting you, if you will allow me, next year. If we look at the budget from 2015 to 19, you will see that the degree of that budget covered by votes 1 to 5, covered by apportionment, has gone down from 93% to 76%. That is because of the way in which we've worked with our partners. And one of the reasons for my huge confidence is the willingness of our partners to help us along the way. I offer my thanks to the Church Commissioners, who have not just given us grants, but have changed their constitution to enable them to do so in a wider scheme of things and not have to come to devices in order that they can give us that increased level of support. I want to thank the Corporation of Church House, who have amended their Royal Charter so that their grant giving cannot be limited to property, and which is already in our budget to the tune of £2.25 million next year. I want to thank All Churches Trust Limited, who, of course, drive their funds out of the profits from ecclesiastical insurance, but who have gone through a whole strategic review of their grant giving to ensure that they maximise the impact of the grants they give. When we have partners like the Commissioners, the Corporation, ATL, we have the ability to create solutions at a bigger level to meet the needs of this massive investment that we are doing to create a church ready for the 2020s and the rest of the century. In my experience, ladies and gentlemen, there are two types of people. There are valley people. They're very good people. They work hard and ethically. They live in villages and towns. They enjoy a good life. They look after their families. They enjoy picnics by the river on a Sunday afternoon after being to church. They're good people. And then there are the mountain people. The people who decide to step beyond the village and to climb the mountain, taking the rough path which they know will have dangers ahead. A path where winds can blow them off course or landslides can come down upon them and make them wonder why they started on that route in the first place. They are the ones that face all the slings of fortune that come before them. They have a very difficult time and sometimes may even lose their way completely, but they know the destination to which they are headed. They're good people as well. But only mountain people get the satisfaction of scaling the peak that they are climbing. Only mountain people get the chance to look beyond their valley into other valleys, across other mountain tops. Only mountain people can understand the totality of God's creation and the opportunities which lie ahead. And I put it to you that when you all decided to vote for the renewal and reform agenda, when the diocese collectively and individually said we aspire to growth, not to keep being this passive church which is gradually sliding down in terms of its evidence to the rest of this country. You chose to be mountain people. We chose to take a difficult path, which we know will have some boulders away. We know that we have the side streams of things like safeguarding that have to be dealt with in the very best way they can be, while at the same time enabling us to keep climbing that mountain so that we are evident to the whole of our country. We standing in the mountain, our hearts blazing with the love of Christ. Everybody can see us, in every community, where we are funding through lower income community funding, strategic funding, all the different grant streams that we have. That's why I do this role. If you want a finance chairman who'll balance the books while the church disappears down a plug hole, you've got the wrong guy. I want to walk with you, climbing the mountain of great joy that brings Christ into the centre of every community in this country. And so I am asked to move all the recommendations set out in your paper. I would remind you this is for the apportionment element of the budget. It is not covering those areas of strategic development funding, lower income funding, transition grants and restructuring grants, all of which I'm happy to talk to. I move the recommendations 15 to 22 set out in your paper.
Thank you very much. Item 15 is now open for debate. Thank you. I invite Martin Gorrick to speak, please, followed by the Bishop of Guildford, Andrew Watson. Thank you. You have 3 minutes. Up to.
Thank you, Chair, for calling me. And Martin Gorrick, Oxford 189. Warm thank you to Canon Spence once again for an inspiring and engaging taking us through of the budget. On Saturday, I experienced quite a conversion experience of my own. It was a heady mix in the afternoon of sex and football, football and more sex, until finally my soul grew weary and I stumbled into the digital evangelism lecture hall and I saw the light. Something I'd been a little cynical of before. You suddenly saw how this was impacting on millions of people and really engaging not just something fancy at the centre, but providing wonderful resources that every parish can be involved with and own. So thank you to the digital team, amongst many others, for their remarkable work. I am, however, a little concerned about page 25, paragraph 84, to find the Corporation of Church House, of which I didn't realise until this weekend I'm a member, is directing a grant of 2.25 million to the Archbishop's Council as part of the 2019 budget. Much of their work, of course, is greatly welcome, and I'm sure so is this grant. But as we heard yesterday and were reminded, they recently hosted a major conference on land warfare with arms trade sponsorship and sponsors in attendance. Is it right for the Archbishop's Council to be seen to benefit from the proceeds of such activity at the heart of our organisation? I fear that unless an ethical lettings policy is urgently adopted by the Corporation of Church House, the credibility of this budget, wonderful in so many respects, will be put at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. After the Bishop of Guildford, I invite Julie Ziegel to speak. Thank you.
Andrew Watson, Guildford 20. Thank you, Madam Chair. I welcome this budget and I'm grateful as ever for the clarity and vision of John Spence's presentation this morning. We are hugely well served by John and the team. My main concern, though, relates to Vote 1 and indeed to all the additional costs involved in training a growing cohort of new clergy. As chair of the Ordained Vocations Working Group, I'm regularly picking up concerns along these lines from those worried about rising diocesan apportionment figures at the same time as they're opening up new curacy opportunities and in some cases growing additional capacity in their vocations teams. I welcome the one-year fix with Vote 1, drawing down £500,000 of capital to help defray some of the training costs, but clearly drawing down capital isn't a long-term option. One of the joys of chairing the working group over the last couple of years has been to meet with vocations teams from around the country who have been sowing and watering with fresh vigour and have seen God give the growth, a growth, as we've heard, of around 22%. That's about 100 new ordinands as compared with just 2 years ago. It's felt almost as miraculous as England's progress in the World Cup and is arguably more important. The quality, too, my BAP selector friends tell me, is excellent. And we're making some progress on the diversity front as well, though there's certainly further work to do here. Another joy of the job is that ours up till now has been a very widely supported task. Dioceses throughout the country have felt the need for more clergy, both stipendiary and self-supporting, not least when they found themselves advertising a parish post several times over before finding a suitable applicant, and have embraced the ordination challenge warmly alongside the broader vocational vision implicit in setting God's people free. But this growth feels a little like the growth of the economy. It's based in part on the confidence that John spoke of earlier. And over the past few months, I've been picking up a less confident response in some quarters. A handful of dioceses are needing to make significant reductions in their stipendiary workforce, acting as a disincentive to the proactive recruitment of a whole lot more, whatever the national need, while other dioceses are questioning the affordability of our growing band of ordinands, especially in the short term before large-scale retirements begin to kick in. So as vocations teams around the country pray and work towards another increase in the number of ordinands next year, the target is at least 30% over the first 3 years of this project, how important that we do all we can to make sure that confidence levels remain high. John Spence has given me his personal commitment here, and our correspondence has been widely circulated. But we need a detailed plan of action by the beginning of next year at the latest, with some Church Commissioner money, I suspect, alongside a wider partnership of contributors, if that prayerful sowing and watering is to continue with enthusiasm and this remarkable new work of the Spirit is not to be quenched. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Julie. Thank you.
Julie Siegel, Oxford 377. I am a member of the Archbishop's Council Finance Committee, but I am speaking here as a parish and deanery treasurer. I would say that possibly the most important part of the report in front of you is page 11, which is the apportionment, and where this budget begins its journey to the person in the proverbial pew. Page 11 sets out the amounts that are apportioned to be paid by each diocese, and the increase in the apportionment is restricted, capped at 4.3%. Oxford, which is obviously my focus of attention, it has an increase of 3.8%, and using a calculator, the amount apportioned is just over £40,000 over the 2% increase that we have limited our diocesan budget to. That's equivalent to 0.2% on our parish share, which is not insignificant when you are trying to limit your parish share to 2% or 1.75% increase. That is set in the knowledge that that is the amount that the parishes can bear. There is a job to be done in communicating with parishes what the money paid by the Archbishop's Council pays for. I have been astonished by the number of people who seem to think that their vicars arrive in their parish fully trained and eager to serve without it having cost any money. We need communication about that through the layers of church. There is also work to be done in parishes to increase generosity. Oxford Diocese has this year, finally, at last, we seem to have been waiting a long time, begun to roll out the parish giving scheme. But I am saddened as a deanery treasurer to hear the number of parishes saying to me that they don't want to implement it. That needs work, and in fact, that's my work. The key to everything, of course, is to spread the word and grow the kingdom and bring more and more people to know and follow our Lord Jesus Christ. Giving is a part of that work, of that walk. But to communicate that part of discipleship, we need to address some issues. We need to address the issue of giving by our millennial generation, the future of our church. But they're saddled with student debt and looking at being unable to afford to buy a house. We need to put work and thought into how we do stewardship with them. We also need to work out how to encourage and teach about giving in the context of Fresh Expressions Church, our new worshipping communities that do not fit our standard methods of stewardship. So there are challenges ahead in the parishes, but we have before us a budget that has limited the budget increase to 3.3%, which is just manageable and actually remarkable given the things that we are funding. We're defunding a blessed increase in the number of ordinands, which is vital to the renewal and reform of our church. I commend this remarkable budget. Please vote for it.
Thank you, Julie. I invite John Spence to respond if he wishes to do so. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
I do indeed, Madam Chairman, thank you. Martin, thank you for the piece about the Corporation of Church House. They are, of course, an independent charity. It's entirely up to them where their boundaries are. I think I would merely point out, firstly, that this was a British Army official event, as I understand it, the one to which you refer. And I am a bit thoughtful about how it would look to the world if we were to step away from being in raising objections to British Army events in Church House. Indeed, there are many government events that take place in Church House which yield valuable income, which is rising to the surpluses, which enable us to have this dividend from them. We are tenants of the Corporation of Church House. They are our landlords, and so there are many complexities to this relationship. But I do invite you to address your question to them at their AGM on the 26th of July. Thank you to the Bishop of Guildford. He and I are indeed in correspondence. It's where, again, I say to the House of Bishops, please, if your prime priority is that we find equitable bases to enable the funding of curacies over the next 10 years, that is where we will direct our resource and our conversations with the commissioners. I will always believe that the support we give to dioceses must be on the basis of proven need and merit. And I'm always very nervous about propositions that take us back to days of blanket subsidy. Julie, thank you for your contribution. We do indeed need to work with the millennials as to how we work on the basis on which they give. Anybody who watches TV, I very rarely do for reasons you might guess, but when I do, Yvonne always tells me that in the commercial TV and the advertisements, there's lots of charities advertising and inviting people to text money spontaneously. We're going to have to tap into the ways in which young people... This is one reason, by the way, why the contactless card machines being installed in parishes is so important. I have worried with my colleagues as to whether we've given sufficient training. And if there is a demand for training, please let us know at Church House, because those machines can be very useful for churches that have significant numbers of visitors, or when people come for weddings or funerals now, they so often don't have cash in their pocket. They can be deployed then, and these are the sorts of things we need to do to have a more enterprising future. Thank you.
Thank you. We return to the debate. Philip Plemming, followed by Zahida Mallard, and the young lady in the middle there. Thank you. Anika Matthews, thank you.
Philip Plemming, Universities and TEIs 453. As Warden of Cranmer Hall, Durham, I want to speak to vote 1, training for ministry budget, and to make 2 points. First of all, I want to speak to paragraphs 43 to 45 of GS 2097, which reminds Synod members of the Resourcing Ministerial Education Initiative. We in the TEI sector are committed to delivering on the aspiration for an increase of ordinance of 50% by 2020. And so we've worked hard at a time of considerable transition to make RME work. Certainly from my perspective, the increased sense of partnership with dioceses has been welcome, and we have found ourselves able to offer increased flexibility in a residential pathway for a number of students. And I want to pay tribute to Ministry Division staff who have gone to great lengths to support TEIs getting used to the new arrangements. Teething troubles are inevitable, but a year on I'm clear that the processes can and do work. Second, I want to address the issue referred to in paragraph 54 of the report concerning contingency funding for Band 3 candidates. And given the necessary brevity of this paragraph, I wonder if for those who don't live and breathe RME, as I do now, a word about context might be valuable. Band 3 candidates are those candidates aged between 40 to 54 at the start of training. The block grant portion does not cover the cost of 2 years residential training for these candidates, meaning that dioceses who want to send them on a residential pathway have to find money from within their IME budget. Even with the commitment from Ministry Division to fund up to 50% of this shortfall, in 2017 we saw a 36% decline in Band 3 candidates entering residential theological training. And I know many saw that as a very concerning figure. Now, I realise other pathways are available and can serve formation well. But I would argue that for someone aged, say, 42 with almost 25 years of ordained ministry ahead of them, 2 years in a residential theological college, giving them the chance to go as deep as possible in the theology and prayer that will feed their mission and ministry is a very good thing. I therefore welcome the decision of Ministry Council, referred to in paragraph 54, to provide now 100% support for those dioceses with a block grant deficit who want to send a Band 3 candidate on a residential pathway. And I support the inclusion, therefore, in the proposed budget. And anecdotally, I would say that there is having some effect, with some suggestion from our intake that this coming autumn, that this is encouraging dioceses to consider a residential pathway for Band 3 candidates. Synod members may recall that as the RME changes were being discussed in Synod, it was this cliff edge in funding at the age of 40 that was one of the most concerning factors. It was feared that candidates who had previously gone to a residential theological college would no longer have this option available. I'm encouraged that this is being addressed, but I would ask that it was considered afresh, so that further consideration is given to tweaking the policy so that the cliff edge at the age of 40 is addressed. We are hugely encouraged by the numbers of women and men training under 30, but we want the biggest opportunity to be of those aged over 40 as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahida.
Zahida Mallard, 329 Leeds. I want to welcome the debate, the budget. However, a plea or a call out with the previous debate about the priorities from the Archbishop's Council about including and welcoming all. The connectivity with John's presentation and the figures around setting God's people free. The 3 learning communities, 120 people were mentioned. Are they inclusive of young and old, black and white, different abilities, all the equality strands? So we monitor consistency to be able to innovate and not just work in silos, that we do the horizon scannings and climb the mountain together so that all communities now and going into the future are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Annika, thank you.
Annika Matthews, Church of England Youth Council, Synod number 481. Thanks for calling me chair. I wasn't actually going to stand to speak in this debate because I hadn't prepared anything to just whilst during the debate, but I speak in relation to the comments made about young people and giving. So I was challenged on this actually at the beginning of this year by someone on my attitude towards giving in churches and just in general. However, being in a position where I've been self-funding and volunteering this year in my community and in church, I've been giving my time rather than my money. And indeed, this has happened for me in the last few years. I've gone from leaving university as a student to volunteering abroad, then back to being a student, and now volunteering this year. Next year, I will actually be earning some money, finally, coming to terms of having a salary and what that will mean. But I'm unsure at the moment about tithing, and I need to still look into it, kind of how much to give, who to give to, etc. I think every church has a different way of giving. I've been to about 4 different churches over the last few years, from moving around year after year. It would be helpful for young people to have some online ways of giving, maybe some monthly debits to the church, as we don't tend to carry, or well, I speak for myself at least, don't tend to carry change all the time with us to churches. And also maybe away from a church, if students, for example, may be part of 2 churches, so it would be good to have some online debits perhaps set up. And I'd be interested to hear about what support is given to churches and the diocese, and advice about encouraging young people to give, and how to go about doing this. I also perhaps suggest dioceses and local parishes investing in community projects to fundraise for churches, as this will positively engage younger people in giving to the church. It will encourage them, as well as to give in general, like money, to share in church family life, to promote evangelism and also community. In my view, this will increase giving amongst younger generations, and is perhaps a better way to do this than expecting us just to give in a church setting. As often, as I said before, younger people do move from church to church, from year to year. Perhaps they're not so committed to the giving side of things, and they're receiving from church, but we would like to be a part of giving and support churches where we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I invite John Spence to respond if he wishes to do so. Again, you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
I love the way you keep saying, if I wish to do so. You won't stop me, you know, so it's fine. Philip, thank you very much for your affirmation of RME and your pleasure at the way we're now dealing with the 40 to 54-year-olds. I know Bishop Martin Seeley is very keen to keep reviewing RME to make sure it works to best effect. Only this morning I was talking with a bishop who's told me how he's budgeting for this over a 3-year period, cautious to begin with, but now feeling more confident in the system. Not everybody aged under 32 who gets the biggest block grant will be appropriate for full-time residential. The great majority will. That should create surpluses that can be redeployed, but we are committed to the deficit. And if I had a plea of the TEIs, I'd love you to join with us in being more enterprising. I'd love to see you coming forward with ways in which you might devise training schemes to help, under the Setting God Free label, the training of lay leaders of the future. Enterprise training for people in the church who are going to be in leadership roles to help them and us deploy those new ways of income. I'm going to come to Annika next, actually, because Annika, I've got bad news for you. That was so helpful, thank you, in terms of the training we need to give parishes and how to help young people give. I'm going to invite you to come along to our finance committee and give us some advice, please. Annika told us she'd been giving of her time pending the day that she has a salary. I just wish other people all thought like you. But just remind ourselves, the financial income of the Church of England is put at 1.4 billion. When you take into account the pro bono aggregate of voluntary time, it is estimated that the true income is more like 7 billion. That's every one of you and every one of the people that you're going back to in your parishes. And Zahida, of course, we must walk in full diversity up the mountain together. My regret, I couldn't tell you actually the diversity makeup of the 3 learning communities that exist. I just know we've got to have far more of them. I just know that we've got to help the Setting God Free people team grow in the ambitions that they have, the developing resources. I keep saying I look forward to the development of our lay leadership across the church, working along our wonderful ordained priests in such ways. If you go back to the very start of this process, what the diocese told us, they wanted about the same number of priests as before, which means the 50% increase in number of ordinands required, and, quote, while unlocking the talents of the laity in abundance. And let's work, TEIs, every one of us, down that route.
Thank you. Penny Allen, followed by gentleman in the check shirt. Thank you. And Keith Cordran. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me. Lichfield 335, Penny Allen. Following concerns yesterday, and in view of the fact that the budget for 2019 has increased by 5%, and given that stewardship of the environment is a mission issue, also that the Council is drawing down £2 million from the Church and Community Fund, and that in paragraph 4 of the commentary, adequate resources are being made available in priority areas, is it not possible that the monitoring issue for church energy bills and reduction of the carbon footprint is given priority, especially in view of the increased expenditure on utility bills noted in paragraph 21, which I assume will be for Lambeth Palace, and could I seek clarity on that? And can I also thank everyone here who is helping us as a low-income diocese. That support is invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. So, Carl Hughes, thank you.
Carl Hughes, 413 Southwark. As a member of the Archbishop's Council Finance Committee, let me be clear from the outset that I am speaking in support of motions 15 to 22, and let me also confirm that I do believe that the committee has rigorously reviewed and challenged the budget, which is now before you for your approval. Having said that, I can now relax with confidence that Canon Spence will not be arranging for me to be taken out and shot later. My reflections on the budget relate to the longer-term trajectory for the funding of the activities of the National Church. The overall budgetary increase that you see in the budget paper of 9% translates into an overall increase of only 3.3% in terms of the £33 million to be funded by diocesan apportionment. Holding the increase in diocesan costs at this level has only been possible by drawing down on other funds and reserves, and this is not a position that can continue indefinitely. Over the next few years, if progress continues to be made in increasing the number of ordinands for training, the costs of the Council are expected to continue to increase, at a time when dioceses will also need to fund the additional curacies which will ensue, possibly before the increase in clergy retirements anticipated in the 2020s occurs. In this context, I believe that there is a need for a more strategic, longer-term approach to the funding of central costs over the next 5 years or so, beyond year-to-year tactical funding. Whilst there may be an opportunity to approach the Church Commissioners, their ability to assist over this period may well be constrained by lower returns and other calls on their resources. So we need to consider other sources of funding. I've been reflecting on the process for parish giving in my own diocese of Southwark, which we introduced 3 years ago. This scheme, which has been incredibly successful, is a scheme based on generosity, whereby parishes make pledges to the diocese on 3 biblically based principles: proportionality, informed generosity, and an aspiration and an encouragement towards becoming self-financing. Thus, richer parishes continue to support poorer parishes, but all strive to be generous according to their ability. My question, therefore, as we seek to re-equip the Church nationally with larger cohorts of new ordinands, is whether these principles could also be applied in a diocesan context. Might some dioceses with greater historical glebe and endowment assets be prepared to be generous in pledging additional contributions to help fund the Church's ministry, thus mitigating the financial challenge ahead for those dioceses with fewer historical reserves? I appreciate that this suggestion might cause total consternation in some quarters, particularly at the quarters directly in front of me. However, may I ask, what are these historical reserves, which run into hundreds of millions of pounds for, if not to support the future ministry of the Church in a context of informed generosity? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Keith.
Keith Cordran, Liverpool 345,
valley person. We're in an unusual position in that we're looking at a budget of £43 million for the council, having just looked at accounts which showed expenditure in 2017 of £139 million. The difference, of course, is the money paid as grants to dioceses from funds provided by the church commissioners. I have three concerns and one specific question for Canon Spence. My first concern is I really feel that we need to have an integrated picture of all the spending planned to be undertaken by the Council. If the Council spending is, as I believe, about £140 million, we should see an analysis that adds up to £140 million. At the moment, what we have is details of the £43 million in the budget and a note that says, by the way, there's another £100 million somewhere else. I don't think that's really good enough. If we saw that total picture, we might ask some questions, and I have one. This is my specific question. The report we received on the Council's activities, GS MIS 1191, includes the line that the Council agreed to reduce the cash allocation for strategic development funding in 2019 from 25.6 million to 24 million. Why, please? My second concern is that we need somewhere, and Canon Spence touched on this, an overview of the total finances of the NCI. The flows are getting very complex. The commissioners, the Archbishop's Council, the Corporation of Church House, the Archbishop's Council Church and Community Fund. I think we need to find a way of presenting plans that is integrated and gives the Synod, and all those with a wider interest in these matters, a clear picture of the total position. So that would be my second concern. How can we get a perspective on what's happening across the NCIs, not just looking at individual sets of accounts? And my third concern, and I return to something that I asked in questions and hope that the Church Commissioners might also be listening, which is a request to publish grants made to dioceses, because we can't see them in any papers I've seen, and also grants that have been firmly planned. If we were covered by the Freedom of Information Act and were asked for these figures, we would, of course, have to provide them. We should not take pride in being less open and transparent than is the norm for the public sector. I have confidence in our financial management, and especially in Canon Spence's inspirational mountaintop leadership. But I also think we need to get into some good habits of sharing information, particularly forward planning information, and encouraging, not deterring, questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I invite John Spence to respond. I know he wishes to.
Thank
you.
You.
Up to 3 minutes.
You caught that on quickly. Penny, thank you very much. And I committed that we would do the work up to next year, February, around this cost of work. But in terms of your specific question, the utilities bill increase is not Lambeth Palace. That gets paid by the Church Commissioners. It's Church House, reflecting the increased occupancy of the building due to the increase in the safeguarding teams and those working on various renewal and reform investment programmes. We will do the work ahead of February, and I understand the priority that Synod give to these issues around environment and climate change. I'll come to Keith next, and Keith, you know I agree with you. We need to find a better way in order to show the whole piece on a joined-up basis. The reason that this debate is around the elements of the budget's votes 1 to 5 is those are the elements on which Synod votes. But I fully take on board the need to have a complete picture of the financial activities of Archbishop's Council. It is not, I'm afraid, for us also to report on all the other bodies involved, but we do need to give you a better joined-up picture. I committed on Friday that we would work on that. I will debate with Mary how best we can do it, but we will make sure that you can see the totality of the giving, all the grants that are going out. I totally agree with you, Keith, on the need for that. Now, Carl. To misquote Mark Twain, reports of your impending assassination are premature. I'm not going to shoot you, Carl. One or two bishops might be a bit thoughtful, but actually the serious point is Carl makes absolutely clear to you all the challenge that we will be undertaking between now and, as the Bishop of Guildford called for earlier, early next year. when we need to be very clear about what the funding for 20 to 22 looks like, and to ensure that that is compatible with the 10-year goals of the Church as a whole and individual dioceses. We need to deal with all the issues that Carl has said, and on the question of generosity of dioceses, no conversation can be off the table. So we will discuss all of this in our drive to develop a consensus and a whole church equitable solution.
Yes, point of order. Well, thank you for that. I've been mulling on a couple of options that we have. Well, there seems to be quite a level of interest in people wishing to contribute in this debate. So I am minded to move a variation in the order of business. I was going to propose that, so that the rubric, which is stated in our order paper, that says not later than 11 a.m. for the next item of business, to be amended to not later than 11:30 a.m. if that has the consent of Synod. So I put that to you as an option. Will all those in favour please say? Or show? And all those against, please? Righty-ho, that's really clear, thank you.
Need a motion.
So, yes, I do need a motion for closure, please. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So will we come to vote on item 50? Sorry, I put the closure first of all, yes. So all those who are in favour of the closure on item 15, please show. Thank you. All those against? Thank you. That is carried. Thank you. So, John and Spence, would you like to add anything else in response to the debate? You have very briefly, if possible, please. 2 minutes max.
I shall indeed be very brief. Could I firstly thank every one of you for participating in this debate. It is very sustaining to understand the levels of interest. I hope you all know that you're very welcome to keep corresponding with us, not just today, but throughout the year. Secondly, I think you understand the complexities of what we're dealing with, but our absolute certainty that we will come back next year with a proposition which makes sense in terms of the 2020s. Thirdly, I would want to express my thanks to my Finance Committee, to the Archbishop's Council, to the people behind me, William Nye and Gareth Mostyn, but there's one rock behind me here who is always too modest to say anything in public, but who is absolutely with me on this financial journey every step of the way. And sometimes it is the unsung hero who is the greatest hero, and David White, you've got that category in my book, so thank you all very much. And Keith, I don't think you are a valley person. Come and climb the mountain with us. Let's get to the top together with a budget that makes sense, that ensures the resources are there for the things which are the greatest priorities of the Church, and that enables us to walk boldly forwards, our hearts ablaze, and to bring others to the joy of Christ. I move again on motions 15 to 22.
Yes. Thank you.
15.
So we move to vote on item 15 only at this stage. To take note of this report, all those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is carried. Item 15 is carried. So we'll need to work together, everyone, to swiftly move through items 16 to 20. I now invite John Spence to move item 16, training for ministry.
If it would help, Chairman, could you take the time moving each of them now collectively, so as I don't need to bob up and down like a puppet?
I'm afraid that's not possible. No. So if you could just
and
say...
And you should get it on back in the end. Right. I move item 16, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 16 is now open for debate. Right, thank you. Let's move straight to voting. As I see no one standing, let's move to vote then. So, all those in favour of item 16, training for ministry, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is carried. Let's do a similar thing with item 17, which is the National Church Responsibilities.
I move item 17.
Thank you very much, John Spence. Any debates on item 17? No, I don't see anyone standing, so let's move straight to vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is also carried. Similarly, let's move to item 18, grants and provisions. John Spence.
I move item 18.
Thank you. I see no one standing. Let's move straight to vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is carried. Item 19, in a similar way, please. Mission agency clergy pensions contributions. I see no one standing. Oh, sorry. John Spence, I'm ahead of myself.
That's great. I tried to hurry it up and then she leaves me out.
Apologies. So,
I move item 19.
Thank you. More haste, less speed. So, I see no one standing. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. That is carried. Item 20, the charm scheme. John Spence.
I will just actually say something here. This is a very important scheme where we're committed to 5% increases through to 2020. That will be another important element to take into the piece, where I know the Pensions Board are concerned to make sure that they meet the needs of clergy, where the House of Clergy have met during the Synod and have asked for a review of stipend and pension arrangements, where we understand that there may be a growing number of people coming up to retirement, and so the demands on this scheme. So this will be another area of important study, but for now I move item 20.
Thank you. I see no one standing. So let's move to vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is carried. We need to be very swift, please, everyone, for item 21, which is over the page on the order paper. John Spence, would you like to move it, please? Thank you.
Yes, I do move item 21.
I see no one standing. So let's move to vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That is carried. And the last item, item 22. Thank you, John Spence. I see no one standing. All those in favour, let's move to vote then. Please show. All those against, please show. Well, we've just about made it for the rubric. So that concludes this item of business, and we move to the next item. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. Thank you.
We now come to item 501. The delay, we were checking whether the House of Bishops was correct, but it is. That the Synod has reached final approval stage of the Ecumenical Relations Measure GS 2046B as required by Standing Order 102. I declare on behalf of the Presidents, the Prosecutors of the Convocations, and the Chair and Vice Chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been complied with in respect of the draft Ecumenical Relations Measure. And I call upon the Archdeacon of Southwark to move item 501, that the measure entitled Ecumenical Relations Measure be finally approved. Archdeacon, you have up to 10 minutes, and I understand you want in your speech to cover item 502. Permission granted.
Jane Steen, Southwark 225. Thank you, Chair. The draft Ecumenical Relations Measure and amending Canon were brought to the Synod as part of the programme of legislative reform proposed by the Simplification Task Group, itself one aspect of the wider renewal and reform programme. The legislation, as members will recall, began life as part of a much larger set of omnibus legislation, the draft Church Representation, Ecumenical Relations and Ministers Measure, and an originally much longer amending Canon 38. The Revision Committee decided to divide that measure and amending Canon so that the provisions concerned with ecumenical relations became a separate measure and a separate amending Canon. This assisted the Revision Committee and, we believe, the Synod in scrutinising and improving legislation concerned with different aspects of the Church's mission and ministry. Perhaps providentially, as I don't recall that this was among the arguments adduced for their separation, this has also increased the profile of this very important legislation in the field of ecumenical relations. Our thanks go particularly to Legislative Council and to the entire legal team of Church House for their careful drafting and redrafting as we have taken this work forward. The Church of England's existing legislation on ecumenical relations was passed in 1988. It created a framework within which a wide range of ecumenical cooperation with partner churches has been successfully fostered. The activity covered by the 1988 legislation has included invitations to and from ecumenical partners to participate in each other's worship, the holding of joint worship, and the establishing of formal relations, local ecumenical partnerships, in which partner churches and our church worship together and pursue the church's mission agenda together on what is effectively a permanent basis. But the ecumenical environment has developed in the 30 years since Synod last legislated for this area. Our legislation now needs to catch up with those developments so that it can continue successfully to foster a wide range of ecumenical cooperation. One significant way in which things have changed is, of course, in the growing number of churches which are not set up on a national basis and which do not have a national structure or governing body. The 1988 legislation was principally designed to enable cooperation between the Church of England and churches which were well established on the national ecumenical scene. The first churches to be designated under the 1988 measure were the Baptist Union, the Methodist Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the United Reformed Church, all designated in 1989. A number of other churches have been designated since then, most recently the Church of Scotland in 2004. And all but one of these churches is a church or body of churches which does have some sort of national structure through which it relates to its ecumenical partners. That reflects the current provisions of legislation which require the designation of partner churches at that national level by our archbishops. Now we need to create similarly fruitful relationships with a large and growing number of other churches, particularly Pentecostal churches, including many black-led and black-majority churches, with whom we share the Christian faith and a common mission. That means we need to ensure that our own legal structures have the necessary flexibility to enable us to create relationships with ecumenical partners who do not necessarily have the sort of structures to which we have been used in the past. One of the central provisions, therefore, of the Ecumenical Relations Measure is a wholly new provision that will enable the bishop of a diocese to designate partner churches at that local level, that diocesan level. Any church which subscribes to the doctrine of the Holy Trinity and administers the sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion can, in principle, be designated. It is for the bishop of the diocese to decide whether such a church is a suitable ecumenical partner for the diocese, and the measure provides the bishop for the framework within which to take that decision. Once the bishop has designated a partner church, so long as the designation remains in place, the partner church is treated in that diocese under the same terms under our canons as any other of the church's ecumenical partners. That will mean that the ministers and members of that church can be invited to perform particular duties in Church of England services, reading the scriptures, preaching and assisting in other ways. It will mean that Church of England clergy and lay ministers will be able to accept invitations to take part in services in the partner church. Joint worship will be possible. The Church of England will be able to participate with churches that are designated at the diocesan level in local ecumenical cooperative schemes. And as I endeavoured to explain earlier in this synod, that is an umbrella legislative body for our legislative use, under which a whole range of current and future local ecumenical initiatives can flourish with their own appropriate local terminology. The legislation does not prescribe detailed rules as to how all this is to happen. The provision in the measure, Clause 2, is quite minimal. The new Canon B43, which replaces the existing ecumenical canons B43 and B44, provides a general framework and sets some boundaries. But much of how to go about making these arrangements work in practice is to be set out in guidance to be issued by the House of Bishops. Clause 3 of the measure provides for the House to issue a code of practice on cooperation by the Church of England with other churches. That code, and any subsequent revision of it, must be approved by the General Synod before it comes into force, so members will have sight of it. The measure and the amending canon make various other improvements. Some uncompleted business from 1988 is being resolved, with provision now being made to enable a member of the Salvation Army to preach at a Church of England service. The Salvation Army is a long-standing partner of the Church of England, but for various reasons, the 1988 legislation failed to make provision that covered them. They're also being relaxed in relation to non-designated churches more generally, so that a member of any Trinitarian church can be invited to read the scriptures or to lead prayers in a Church of England service. The amending canon, as I have said, replaces the existing ecumenical canons with a single canon about ecumenical relations. It reflects the changes to the overall framework for ecumenical relations that are being made in the measure, and it also presents the canonical provisions in a way that is much easier to follow, removing the need to cross-refer between one canon and another, and setting out the provisions in a much more straightforward and clear manner. The policy has been to include only as much detail as is really necessary, and to leave other matters to the Code of Practice to be made by the House of Bishops. That should mean that the practical changes can be made in the future as they are needed, without needing to revise the canon. I hope, therefore, that Synod will support this enhanced legal inclusivity and flexibility in our ecumenical relations, and I commend the draft measure and the amending canon to Synod. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Deacon Othazak, thank you very much. Item 501 is now open for debate. May I remind members that understanding Order 64, motions for the closure, the speech limit on next business are not in order in this debate. Yes, ma'am.
Lisa Batty, 169 Manchester. Thank you for calling me, because it allows me to really welcome this measure and amending canon. I'm holding in my hand this petition to the Queen for something that has been on my heart for 50 years. which followed from reading John chapter 17 and finding Jesus saying to his disciples, praying to God that we might be one, even as he and his Father were one. And so I have longed and still long for a Trinitarian unity between the churches that proclaim his name. As the Church of England, we love our land, but we cannot re-evangelize England without those Christians in the denominations that are springing up around us. And this gives us opportunity. And I hope it will give us opportunity and will prompt us and make us proactive in opportunity, taking the opportunities to go to the churches who are not currently designated as partners with us, but who could be if only invited. And I believe that all our bishops need to be asked, please look for churches to designate as new partners. And all our parishes need to be encouraged to make relationships, particularly with those that we are already close to, like the Methodists in the working towards the mission and ministry and covenant. And I pray that God will give us a new enthusiasm for this work of ecumenical unity, for the sake of the work of the kingdom in our land.
Penny Allen, Lichfield 335. This is a very warm welcome and a completely unprepared speech because just over 40 years ago we moved into a new garden village. It was a struggle to build our church. When our local senior member of the Church of England came to visit us, he said to us, as an LEP, because we have a joint membership with the URC, as an LEP, I'm afraid you're going to find that if you pay attention to all the rules, you'll scarcely be able to operate. Though we would encourage you to think flexibly, to look locally, to look ecumenically, and to think about who you can work with. We'd only been there for a very short time before we found ourselves working. We were already in partnership with our 3 miles away URC, and we found ourselves being approached by other churches in our area to do a mission project within our community. Shortly after that, we found ourselves raising money for charity, and we found ourselves in joint venture for that. Shortly after that, we were looking at training courses, and we were thinking, can we use those ecumenically? We are in a covenanting relationship now with 9 other churches, and if we had not, I put my hand on my heart and say to you, I don't know how many rules we've broken. Please help us by passing this legislation, and we'll actually feel as if we're legal. Thank you.
Penny, you may be absolved, all right? Pardon? Any of you? Oh, sorry, ma'am. Yes, please.
Debbie Flack, Europe 113. Thank you for calling me. We in the Diocese in Europe warmly welcome the draft of this measure on ecumenical relations. It clarifies and simplifies the legislation surrounding the work and worship with our ecumenical colleagues. It reminds us of the wide number of sister churches with whom we already share the proclamation of the gospel, and it opens further opportunities for us to participate in acts of worship in other churches with whom we are not normally allowed to set foot in, of course, but we probably do. and to invite those members of those churches to participate in our acts of worship. So this is a most welcome move in the context of the permanent work and contact with a broad range of Christian churches with whom we live and work in the diocese in Europe. So I just warmly commend this to Synod. Thank you.
Beverley Hollins, Peterborough 192. I declare an interest. I am a member of a domestic ecumenical partnership and have spent the whole of my life working not only in that domestic situation, but in local, regional, national and international ecumenism. It is my life. I therefore welcome warmly this updating of the 1988 legislation. Canon Martin Reardon, who was involved in the 1988 work, was a personal mentor to me, and I am glad we are able to honour and continue all that he did as we move forward. I look forward to seeing the code of practice and look forward to it being a code of practice that enables ecumenism to be something not just for ecumeniacs and people like me who are involved in domestic ecumenical partnerships, but something that truly lives out the prayer of our Lord in John 17, that we may be one that the world might believe. It is a missional imperative that we work and go out in mission together with our brothers and sisters of all traditions. And I pray that through this piece of work, we will work together for that end, that the world may believe. Thank you for calling me.
See no one else standing, so I invite the Archdeacon to reply.
Thank you, Chair. Jane Steen, Southwark 225. Thank you, members of Synod, for such a warm and overwhelmingly generous welcome for this legislation. Yes, Lisa Batty, thank you. Let's create a culture of invitation so that among the churches that proclaim the name of Jesus, we may participate in the evangelization of England, newly enthusiastic for the work of the kingdom. Penny Allen, after His Grace's absolution, we will pass over any matter of ignoring the rules. But yes, let us think creatively, look locally and work ecumenically. Debbie Flack, thank you for the contribution from Europe and how important at this time that the churches in particular take a lead on widening good relationships and opportunities for good relationships and good working across European partner denominations. And finally, Beverley Hollins, thank you very much indeed. I suspect you're not the only domestic LEP here. And yes, indeed, let us all be mindful of the mission imperative in all that we do. We do everything that the world may believe and know the transforming love of Christ as we do. Thank you, Synod. Thank you, Chair. I think I now move do I now formally move this piece of...
I think you did move it.
Have I done moved?
You did earlier on at the beginning before you
much.
spoke. The question is that the measure entitled the Ecumenical Relations Measure be finally approved in accordance with Standing Order 37. I order a counted vote by houses since this Article 7 business.
I'm now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
They voted in the House of Bishops. Those in favour, 22. Against, none. Recorded abstention, none. In House of Clergy, those voted in favour, 84. Against, 2. Recorded abstention, none. Those in the House of Laity, those in favour, 95. Against, none. Abstention, 4. It's been carried in all 3 houses, so that the Ecumenical Relations measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. Synod, that concludes this item of business. We now come to item 502, that the Synod has reached the final approval stage of drafting Canon number 38, and that members will need the draft amending Canon GS 2047B and the petition for the Royal Assent and License GS 2047C. As required by Standing Order 102, I declare on behalf of the President, the Prolecutors of the Convocations, and the Chair and Vice Chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been complied with in respect to draft amending Canon number 38. I call on the Archdeacon of Southwark to formally move this particular item.
Thank you, Chair. James Dean, Southwark 225. I do so move.
Debate. I see no one standing. So the question is that the canon entitled amending Canon number 38 be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Orders 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I'm now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
The question is that the canon entitled amending canon number 38 be formally approved in accordance with standing orders by order accounted vote of the House. This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
The motion has been carried in all 3 houses. They voted in the House of Bishops, 23, against none, recorded abstention none. House of Clergy in favour 88, against 2, recorded abstention none. In the House of Laity they voted those in favour 107, against none, recorded abstention 3. I now call upon, it's been carried in all 3 houses, therefore I call the Archdeacon to move item 503 that the petition for Her Majesty's Royal Assent and License, GS 2047C, be adopted.
Thank you, Chair. I do so move.
Is there any debate? I put the motion to the vote, and this is a simple majority that's required. So those in favour, please show. Thank you. To the contrary? Any recorded abstentions? The petition is clearly carried. Thank you very much for that item. We now come to item 505. Members of Synod, we come to item 505, that the Synod has reached the final approval stage of the Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions Measure, GS 2064B. As required by Standing Order 102, I declare on behalf of the President, the prosecutors of the convocations, and the Chair and Vice Chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been complied with in respect of the draft Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions Measure. I call on Ms. Josie Monroe to move item 505, that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provision Measure be finally approved. Ms. Monroe, you may speak up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Josie Monroe, London, 356. I move that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions Measure be finally approved. This is the 12th in a series of miscellaneous provisions dealing with uncontroversial matters that do not merit separate freestanding legislation. The fact that the matters it deals with are not controversial does not mean that they are not important. I'm now going to summarise the main features of the measure, which contain 16 clauses. The Church Commissioners currently have no power to apply their funds towards furthering the mission and work of the Church of England generally. The Commission's powers are currently confined to specific matters such as the payment of bishops' stipends, the payment of certain costs associated with cathedrals, the payment of certain pensions, and the making of additional provision for the cure souls in parishes where such assistance is required. Clause 1 will enable the Church Commissioners to support the work and mission of the Church of England more generally. It does that by creating a new power for the Church Commissioners to make grants out of their general fund to the Archbishop's Council. The Archbishop's Council's objects are to coordinate, promote, aid, and further the work of the mission of the Church of England. A grant could be made to the Council under the new power for any purpose that came within these wide objects. While this new power, will not mean that there is more money available overall, it will mean that the Commissioners have greater flexibility over the way they make it available, enabling them to support aspects of the Church's mission that they have not previously been able to do so within their funding powers. The provisions in Clause 4 should make it easier for bereaved families and funeral directors to find clergy and lay ministers who are willing and able to provide authorised Church of England funerals. As the law currently stands, a funeral service at a cemetery or crematorium may be provided by the minister of the parish where the deceased has died, resided, or on the church electoral roll. There is currently no provision which enables assistant or retired clergy or licensed lay persons to officiate at a funeral at a cemetery or crematorium, even if they are asked to do so by the deceased minister or by the family or friends of the deceased. Clause 4 will provide authority for any member of the clergy who has current authority to minister in the Church of England to perform a funeral service at a cemetery, crematorium, or other non-parochial setting, if asked to do so by the persons concerned. Before performing the funeral, he or she must, as so far as is practicable, inform the minister of the deceased parish, and seek his or her goodwill. This should ensure that the pastoral contact is made and followed up. Clause 4 also widens existing statutory provision concerned with funerals and crematoria and cemeteries, so that an incumbent can arrange for someone else to perform the funeral of a parishioner if the incumbent cannot personally do so. The incumbent will be able to arrange for another member of the clergy or deaconess reader or lay worker to perform the funeral on his or her behalf. Clause 7 makes a decision of the Provincial Appeal Court binding on lower ecclesiastical courts in both provinces. This should help remove anomalies that have resulted from different approaches being taken by the appeal courts in provinces of Canterbury and York. Clause 9 untangles the arrangements for varying or cancelling arrangements for groups of sessions of the General Synod. In its final form, the clause proceeds entirely logically. Where the provision for the Synod to meet has been made by the Synod, only the Synod, acting through its 6 officers, can vary this arrangement. When the provision for it to meet has been made by the presidents, then it is they who have the power to vary the arrangements they have previously made. Other elements of the measure include the making of minor improvements to the terms of service legislation, the making of improvements to legislation concerned with ecclesiastical fees and with ecclesiastical legal aid, simplifying the procedures for the execution of formal documents by PCCs, the Church Commissioners, the Pension Board and the Archbishop's Council, enabling Diocesan Advisory Committee and Church Building Council to delegate functions to officers, and making minor improvements to the procedures for pastoral schemes and orders, and the procedure for bishop mission orders. The steering committee hopes that despite the technical nature of much of this legislation, these miscellaneous provisions will nonetheless make a real difference to the mission and work of the Church of England. I do hope the Synod will be able to support the final approval of this measure.
Ms. Cecile Munro, thank you very much. Item 505 is open for debate. May I remind members that under Standing Order 64, motions for the closure, the speech limits on next business are not in order in this debate. And from the outset, I impose a speech limit of 3 minutes. Anybody wanting to speak, please? Yes, Mr. Biden.
Charles George, Auditor in this province and Dean of the Arches, 454. In respect of Clause 7, in introducing the measure, there was a reference to such a decision being binding. The wording of the provision doesn't include the word binding, and in my submission, and as I explained when this matter was under consideration in London, it will be treated by the court as if made by the other court. The extent to which it's binding will depend upon the view taken by the appellate court in question.
Any further debate? Please.
Andrew Williams, 294 Coventry. I just particularly want to welcome in this, which otherwise might be considered quite a dry report, the excellent changes that are being made to the provisions on funerals. Funerals are a very important pastoral service that we as the Church of England provide, and simplifying this in such a way to allow a family's choice of clergy or other lay minister to take part in the funeral, to provide them the services they need to help them at this bad time for them, is, I think, excellent and a good use of a change of legislation to drive the mission of the Church. Thank you.
I see no one else standing, so may I invite Ms. Cecile Munro to reply to the debate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Synod, for a generous welcome to this legislation. And thank you for the two people who spoke, Charles George in clarifying, making it more clear about the courts and what binds which court, and also Andrew Williams for welcoming the issues around, the clause around funerals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The question is that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provision Measure be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I am now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the vote will begin.
This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
They voted in the House of Bishops in favour 23, against none. Recorded abstention none. In the House of Clergy they voted 105 in favour, against no one. Recorded abstention none. They voted in the House of Laity in favour 124, against none. Recorded abstention none. Therefore, the motion is carried that the Church of England Miscellaneous Provision Measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. Synod, that concludes this item of business, and thank you very much for your patience.
We now come to item 506 of the agenda. Synod will now take the final drafting and final approval stages of the draft church properties measure and the draft Church of England pension measure. Members will need draft measures GS 2083A, GS 2084A, and the report of the steering committee, GS 2083Y and 2084Y. I call upon Vicar General of the Province of Canterbury, Chancellor Bryden, to move item 506, that the Synod do take note of this report. He has up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Timothy Bryden, 455, Vicar General of Canterbury ex officio. These two draft consolidation measures, which received first consideration in February 2018, now come before Synod for final drafting and final approval. There is a single steering committee report covering both measures, and members of Synod will also be helped by having the drafting notes of Standing Council. The work of consolidation, although superficially not terribly exciting, is very important if the law of the Church is to be kept up to date and in a digestible form. Consolidation does not involve making substantive changes to the law. Instead, it brings together existing legislation on a given topic into one measure, removing inconsistency or duplication and modernising terminology. Of the measures, the first, the church property measure, contains provisions dealing with parsonages, glebe land, the acquisition of land, and a variety of technical matters concerning conveyancing and property rights. Although to the non-lawyer it does not make easy reading, the effect is to produce a single and practical body of legislation, which will be a considerable help to those who deal with the property interests of the Church. And this measure will replace something of a patchwork of property legislation which has accumulated over many years. A final trawl through the draft measure has produced some extra drafting amendments which are annexed to the Steering Committee's report. Most important among them is confirmation, if confirmation were required, that notices or notifications under the measure may be given by electronic means, thus bringing the practice of church property lawyers into line with the generality of their specialist colleagues in the property field. Turning to the Church of England pensions measure, it has recently been estimated that more than 50% of ordained clergy are now in receipt of pensions, and I can promise that the present members of the House of Bishops and the House of Clergy, however young, will find that they get an increasing concern about the content of this legislation as the years roll by. The draft measure is designed to bring into one measure the provisions of the Clergy Pension Measure 1961, which now itself is approaching pensionable age, and numerous other measures and regulations down to the pensions pre-consolidation measure of 2018. It also repeals and reenacts Section 11.3 of the Miscellaneous Provisions Measure 2018, dealing with the execution of documents. Among the final drafting amendments annexed to the Steering Committee's report are two items introduced by the Pensions Pre-Consolidation Order of 2018, made under Section 8 of the Legislative Reform Measure 2018, and in receipt of the deemed approval of this Synod. An order was required because substantive changes to the law outside the scope of the consolidation procedure were required. The first, now appearing in clause 15.5 of the draft measure, gives retrospective effect to the payment of lump sums to clergy retiring up to 10 years before normal retirement age. This corrects what was probably an unnoticed error in the Church of England lump sum payments rules 1988. The second, in paragraph 2.6 of Schedule 1, disqualifies from membership of the Pensions Board a person prohibited or suspended under sections 3 or 4 of the Pensions Act 1995. Obviously, it would be inappropriate for a person unfit to act under the secular regulatory regime to serve on the Pensions Board. By their very nature, measures of this kind do not give rise to questions of policy. So the principal burden of preparing these drafts for Synod has fallen not upon the Steering Committee, grateful as I am to the support of the members of that committee, but upon Standing Counsel and the staff of the Legal Office. The committee is grateful for the resources allocated to the work of consolidation, and especially to Mr. Christopher Packer and the Reverend Alexander McGregor for the time and effort expended upon their task. The resulting drafts may indeed be taken as a monument of their endless labour. We are very grateful to them. I hope that the Synod will support this tidying up exercise and enable the legislation to go forward as a useful adjunct and help to those who administer the affairs of the Church in the property and pensions fields. And I therefore will invite Synod to take note of the report. Thank you.
Item 506 is now open for debate. I call David Lamming. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'll need just one. David Lamming, 399 St Edmunds, Ipswich. I just wanted to point out, in the light of an observation that was made earlier this morning as to where we are with simplification, how we're getting on with it, that what we've heard from Tim Bryden just now is that we are making use of the legislative reform measure within 2 months of its being given royal assent. And that's because the pensions pre-consolidation order, which is GS 2106, which I think will come before us a little later for approval, is being made under the legislative reform measure. It doesn't actually require the scrutiny committee process because it's in a separate section of the Legislative Reform Act, which enables pre-consolidation amendments to be made by a simplified process. So there, members of Synod, is an illustration straight away of how this reform is being put into practice.
Call Chancellor Bryden to respond, should he wish to.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to respond to such a brief and well-focused debate.
Point of order. There was someone standing at the point that you called Chancellor Bryden back to the podium.
And I will call next speaker, Chancellor Bryden, back to respond in that order. Would you like to continue? Oh, okay.
Penny Allen, Lichfield 335.
Sorry, Penny, I'm told Chancellor Bryden must be allowed to complete.
I did think you knew me.
Yeah, okay, apologies.
It's all right, don't worry.
Penny Allen.
I just wanted to warmly welcome this and just say to you as a member of the Glebe Committee for our diocese that the church property measure, particularly in disposal of land, is critically important at the moment. The reason I'm saying that is because I've just been on a set of visits with our land management agent and looking at HS2 arriving in our area and the disposal of redundant churches, to be able to actually section a churchyard for sale with a house or not, to actually sell a piece of land for new housing development, to actually talk to the land agent and suddenly find that we have got in our area 6,000 properties that he's now got to review as blighted with HS2 has been a surprise. And I think in terms of disposing of some redundant churches and church property, the church property measure will be extremely helpful. And I don't think I know anyone who won't welcome the electronic mail. Okay, thank you.
As I see no one else standing, Chancellor Bryden, would you like to respond?
Yes, I was going to express thanks for one speech. Now I can express thanks for two. It's very good that these proposals have been received warmly in the way that they have, and I think I need formally to move that the Synod take note of the report.
Thank you. We now put item 506 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Item 506 is carried. We now move to item 507 on the agenda, and I call on Chancellor Bryden to move.
And then I move that the measure entitled the Church Property Measure be finally approved.
Although no one is standing, I'm informed I need to remind Synod members that under Standing Order 64, motions for closures, the speech limit or calling for the next item of business are not in order for this debate. The debate is now open. Because no one is standing, we now need to move to a vote. The question is that the measure entitled Church Property Measure be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I'm now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
We now put item 507 to the vote. This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
House of Bishops. Those in favour, 25. Those against, 0. Recorded abstentions, 0. House of Clergy, those in favour, 104. Against, 0. Recorded abstentions, 0. The House of Laity, 126, 4. Those against, 0. And recorded abstentions, 0. The motion is carried. In all three houses, the church property measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. We now move to item 508, and I call on Chancellor Bryden to move motion 508.
Chair, I move that the measure entitled the Church of England Pensions Measure be finally approved.
This item is now open for debate. As I see no one standing, I'm also required to remind you, should you change your mind and wish to speak in this debate, that under Section Order 64, once again, motions for closure, the speech limit, or calling for the next item of business are not in order for this debate. As I see no one standing, we put this item to the vote. The question is that the measure entitled Church of England Pension Measure be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I'm now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
We now put item 508 to the vote. This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
The House of Bishops, those in favour, 24, those against, 0, recorded abstentions, 0. House of Clergy, 106, in favour, against, 0, recorded abstentions, 0. House of Laity, those in favour, 129, those against, 0, recorded abstention, 0. The motion is carried in all three houses. The Church of England Pensions Measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. That completes this item of business. We'll now move to the next item on the agenda.
Good afternoon, Synod. We come to item 509, the report by the Revision Committee on the draft Church Representation and Ministers Measure and draft amending Canon number 39. Members will need the report of the Revision Committee and draft measure and canon. I call on the Chair of the Revision Committee, Professor Joyce Hill, to move the motion that the Synod do take note of this report. Professor Hill may speak for not more than 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Joyce Hill leads 326. Chair, this second report of the Revision Committee deals with what remains after the committee divided the measure and amending canon, namely the new church representation rules, some provisions relating to ministers and provisions concerned with the holding of services. We needed 7 meetings to complete our work. That reflects in part the number of submissions the committee received and had to consider, but it also reflects the sheer scale of the exercise. This is the first time the church representation rules have been completely overhauled, and doing so was a considerable undertaking. We believe that the result is a set of clear, comprehensible, workable rules that meet the current needs of the church. The new rules are a few hundred words longer, but only a few hundred, longer than the existing church representation rules, but we think that is justified. Firstly, because they're much easier to read. Secondly, because they try to avoid leaving questions unresolved. And thirdly, because they provide for considerably more flexibility than the current rules, and we needed the space to say how that flexibility will operate. A major issue the committee had to address was compliance with the new data protection legislation. Do I hear a groan in Synod? Our policy has been to make it as easy as possible for parishes, deaneries and dioceses to operate the rules in a way that complies with those requirements. Having taken legal advice, we decided that we should not rely on consent as the lawful basis for the processing of personal data under the rules. That would have imposed an unacceptable burden on those who will operate the system. Instead, because the rules are statutory, we can rely on the ground that the processing of personal data required by the rules is, quote, necessary for the compliance with a legal obligation, end quote. And in relation to special category data, data that in this case reveals individuals' religious beliefs, we can rely on the fact that the processing required by the rules is carried out in the course of the legitimate activities of the Church of England with appropriate safeguards, and that the data is not disclosed outside the Church. The committee made amendments to accommodate electronic communication and electronic voting in elections. While we could have left this to the Elections Review Group to take forward at a later date, we decided that we should grasp the nettle now and, as far as possible, future-proof the rules. As a result, the new rules will treat email addresses to all intents and purposes as equivalent to a postal address, and emails as equivalent to written paper documents. It remains optional whether to provide an email address, but where an email address has been provided, it can be used for all purposes of the rules and passed on to others, for example, the Secretary of the Deanery Synod, where the rules require that. We have left it to the General Synod to write its own election rules, as it currently does. No doubt when it does, it will include provision for electronic voting in elections. It will then be open to diocesan synods to decide to have a system of electronic voting in their elections. We have simplified the rules about church electoral rolls. And I hope I hear a hooray here rather than a groan that I heard in relation to the data protection. Names will no longer need to be removed from the roll during the course of the year. That will be done only as part of the annual revision. We've included provision which should help avoid the situation where a person's name is wrongly removed from a roll because, for example, that person has been prevented from attending services by illness. We've removed the requirements for the annual publication of additions and removals from the roll. It will suffice simply to publish the revised roll, and the PCC can decide the form in which the roll is published, whether on paper or on a website. We were persuaded that there should be considerably better representation of mission initiatives in the synodical structures of the Church. We have strengthened existing provision for the representation of mission initiatives on deanery synods by making it mandatory for the diocesan synod to make a scheme for their representation where the bishop so directs. We have also made those who worship in mission initiatives eligible for election to diocesan synods and the General Synod. If the leader of a mission initiative declares a person to be part of the worshipping community involved in the initiative, he or she is then qualified for election as a member of the Diocesan Synod and the General Synod, subject, of course, to meeting the usual requirements as to age and being an actual communicant. Other changes we made include enabling PCCs to conduct some business by correspondence, increasing the flexibility of the provision for joint councils, and clarifying provisions concerned with disqualification on safeguarding grounds. As a result of a particular case having been drawn to our attention, we have also inserted provision to ensure that the lay members are always in the majority on a PCC. As to the rest of the measure, we left out a clause that would have abolished the rule that a person must have been in holy orders for 6 years to be eligible for appointment as a dean, archdeacon or residentiary canon. We could not see any adequate justification for changing that requirement. We spent some time considering the provisions in the amending canon concerned with morning and evening prayer. One submission urged us to drop the requirements in relation to those services altogether, or at least to attenuate them significantly. But a majority of the committee were content with the form Canon B11 will take once the amending canon comes into force. It's not unreasonable to expect morning and evening prayer to be held daily somewhere in each benefice, particularly given that the clergy can call on the laity to assist by officiating at these services. We did not wish to see a fundamental change in what is supposed to be normal pattern of worshipping life in the Church of England. There simply is not time in a 10-minute speech for me to go into the detail of our work. But the detail is there in our report, And even if members do not agree with all the decisions we took, and I don't suppose they will, I hope it will be apparent that we have taken our responsibilities seriously. I wish finally to take this opportunity of publicly thanking the legal department for their outstanding support in this unusually large and involved piece of work. Their exemplary professionalism and at the more personal level, their unfailingly constructive and cooperative approach at times when we must have taxed their patience, deserves an acknowledgement before the whole of Synod. Chair, I move that Synod do take note of this report.
Thank you. Your tummies will be telling you, we're up north, so it's dinner up here, that dinner is awaiting us. So I'm going to adjourn this debate at this point, but it would be really helpful to me if you would just indicate if you were hoping to speak in the debate, which will then resume at 2:30. Could you just indicate, stand, wave, or anything like that, which would be great. I'm not taking a register, so I adjourn this debate. We'll see you at 2:30.